All right, so welcome to the Introduction to Bootstrap Part 3. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to keep working in our current really lovely site here. And we are going to start by creating a drop-down. So to create a drop-down, I'm going to set mine somewhere in the middle of this so that I can understand how that drop-down works. And just otherwise if it has no place to drop, it's really hard to see. So I'm going to go ahead and create a let me work in here. So I'm going to work right in the middle of this, and I'm going to just create a new button, and set the type to being button, and the class is going to be btn info. I'm going to set the words to read select type. And then I'm going to create a div with the class of drop-down menu. Drop-down menu. And then inside that div, I'm going to create all of my options here. So I'm going to create my A with a class of drop-down item. Href is just going to be a placeholder, and that's going to read option 1. I'm going to go ahead and copy that whole little option 1 and paste it in a couple more times so that way I can have this read as option 1, 2, 3, and 4. Option 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm going to paste this again, and I'm going to create some things that read selection, just so I have a couple different menu items. So this one is going to read selection. I'm going to go ahead and copy all of that here. Paste, paste, and so that'll read section 1, 2, and 3. There we go. So what we currently have is a button that just functions like this. Here's our select type button, and nothing is really happening. So what we need to do with that is we need to wrap this whole button and the drop-down menu items inside of a div with the class of drop-down. So here is a div class of drop-down. I'm going to go ahead and wrap that div all the way around. So I'm going to cut the ending div tag and then wrap that all the way around, so the all the menu items here, so you can see here's the div with the class of drop-down. Let me scoot that one over. Scoot these over so they're more lined up so you can see where everything is going. And go. So then I've got this div here. It's going with that button. And then here's our drop-down items, or our menu items. And then the last thing we need to do with this is, to make this a functional drop-down, is to add a data toggle to our button here. So we've got our button with the class of btn info, says select type. We're going to go ahead and write a data toggle, and that's going to be drop-down. So that'll give it the behavior of a drop-down. I'm going to go ahead and save that, and I can see that that now functions as a drop-down. So when I hit select type, there's all my options and my selections. You can create some drop-down headers in your drop-down by adding the following divs. So I'm going to wrap all of these options into a drop-down header class. So within here, I'm going to create a new div, and it is going to have a class of drop-down header. And that's going to say options. And then I'll create another one here, and that will have a div with a class also of drop-down header. And that one's going to say selections. So if you have a lot of menu items, you can do this. Save that. And there you can see there's the options. There's the header that says selections. So to add a divider in between the two sections, we're going to add a list item that has a roll of separator before the selections drop-down header. So before this drop-down header here, right after option 4, I'm going to go ahead and create a div with a class of drop-down divider. Save that, and now you can see there's a nice little dividing line there. So we've got a lot more styling going on to our basic drop-down. If you want to highlight a specific drop-down item, you can add an active class to it, and that's going to add a blue color to it. So if I want to make option 2 here, our active class, within the class of drop-down item, I'm just going to add something that says active. So if you wanted that to highlight on a specific menu page, there you go, and that's going to highlight blue. To disable a drop-down item, you can just add a disabled class to it. So if I wanted to disable option 4, I can simply add the class of disabled. So it says drop-down item disabled, and that's going to go ahead and disable this option. You can see I can't hide, I can no longer select it. Oh, takes me back to the top. To change, if you want your drop-down menu to change to dropping up instead of dropping down, you're going to change the div class from drop down to drop up. So this is the one that wraps around everything. So instead of drop down, it's now going to read drop up. Save that, and then you can see that that now goes up instead of down. So that works well if you've got a menu towards the bottom of the page and you need the options to move up instead of down. So now we're going to work with button groups. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and create 7 individual buttons, changing the name of the button. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of this drop down, and I'm going to create some new buttons. So just creating a button. It's going to have the type of button, and I'm going to do the class of BTN primary, and I'm just going to write the name of that button. So I'm just going to highlight that whole thing, copy it, and I'm going to paste it, change that to replace, change this one to read date, that one to read time, change this one to read email, address, we'll do phone. Okay, so there I've got my here's my buttons. So you can see right now they're individual. So putting a button group is going to kind of squish them together. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back into my code here. I'm going to create a new div, and I'm going to give it the class of BTN group. I'm going to wrap that ending div around all of my buttons here. And you can see that kind of squishes them all together, so there's you don't have all the individual padding in between. Now they're all one big group of buttons. To add accessibility to the button group, you should give that button group a role. It's helpful for people who are on screen readers. So I'm going to set the role to being group. There we go. So that's a little bit helpful. Additionally, I'm going to add an ARIA label of ... So ARIA label, and that's ... So that lets people know that there is more things here. Button groups can be stacked vertically by modifying the button group, so then it just goes to BTN group vertical. If I save that, then it goes to a vertical group as opposed to the default horizontal group. So now we're going to start working with a nav component. So I'm going to jump to the top of my page here and bring in my nav component towards the top here. So you move into my container here. So I've got my initial container, got my headline. Let me jump into this first one here. So I've got my row here, and inside here I'm going to go ahead and create that unordered list that's going to turn into some navigation. So I'm going to create an unordered list. Inside there I'm going to go ahead and create my list items, and that's going to need an A, href, pound sign. That's going to read home. I'm going to go ahead and copy that entire list item, paste that in, and this is going to read about. Paste that in here again. We'll do a products. Paste it in again. This one is going to be contacts. And this last one is going to be reviews. Save that, and now I've got, scroll to the top so I can see it. Here's my unordered list. I think I'm actually going to bring this all the way to the top of the page, so that way it's going to function more like an actual nav bar. So let me go ahead and cut that list here. I'm going to throw it in above my header. Paste it right there. Okay, just so, here we go. Now that's going to look a lot more like a nav bar when I get it going on here. So to make these links into navigation components, you can add the nav class and then specify either tabs, pills, or nav bar. So in this unordered list, I can change the class of it. So the class is going to be nav pills. So in order to get these to appear more like the pills that we have in here, we need to add in a couple items to our list item elements here. So in every navigation item, we need to add in the list item class. So every list item needs a class of nav item, and this is something that's new in Bootstrap 4. It was not present in Bootstrap 3. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight and copy that class of nav item here, and I'm going to apply it to all of my list items. And then on my A tags, I'm going to go ahead and add in a class of nav link. Highlight and copy and paste that class in onto all of these items. And then let me go ahead and save that. And that should space these out a little bit better, but I don't really see the pill color. So on these nav links, I'm going to go ahead and add in the first one to be active. And then I can see that gives me this blue. There's that nav pill. So I can also change this to being tabbed. Change that to tabs. Oops. Tabs. And then so I can do tabs so that will look kind of like these little file tabs or pills. And that's a stylistic difference in there. So now the next thing we're going to go ahead and do is turn this into a full-on navigation bar. So within Bootstrap, a navigation bar can extend or collapse depending on the screen size. So this is where you can have it go the full width of your page at on a desktop size, or collapse into more of a hamburger menu or collapsed navigation for a mobile device. So a standard navigation bar is created with the Nav Bar class, followed by a responsive collapsing class, such as Nav Bar Expand, and then you give the size extra large, large, medium, or small. So that's saying what size screen you want this to go from a expanded Nav Bar into that collapse. So to go ahead and turn this into our current list items here into a Nav Bar, we're going to go ahead and have to place it inside something with a nav class. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up, and I'm going to create our nav tag, and I'm going to give it the class of Nav Bar Expand Small BG Light, which says the background is light. And I'm going to wrap that ending nav tag around my unordered list here. I'm going to set my unordered class here to read Nav Bar Nav. And then I'm going to save that. And I can see that this adjusts so that it puts this kind of gray color behind everything, and then the links are blue. I currently have mine set in a container, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that container, and because it was a fixed width container. When I delete that, you'll see that this is going to go ahead and go full screen. So that way that gray color is going full screen. If I want to change this to being a dark background, I can go ahead and change the BG so it'll read BG dark. Save that. And now you can see I get a nice dark color nav bar background for that. I can also change any of these to be, I can change the background of this to being any of our contextual classes too. So if I wanted to change this, I can say, all right, that the, we're going to change it to BG Success, and then Nav Bar Light, which will change our link colors. So I've got this nice green with the black text. I can also change it to read Nav Bar Dark, and that will change the text to being a light color. So you can see that you can have a lot of fun with some of the built-in color classes within Bootstrap. So if I change that to BG Primary, now I've got a blue nav bar with white text. So all those contextual things come back in creating your basic nav. To add in the Nav Bar brand, we're going to use the Nav Bar brand class within our Nav Bar itself. So I'm going to navigate to my Nav Bar, and before my unordered list with the class of Nav Bar nav starts, I'm going to go ahead and create a link, so an A tag, and I'm going to give it the class of Nav Bar brand. I'm going to set this to being a placeholder link. I'm going to just write the word logo. And if I save this, you can see that it's going to create any words that I type in here at a slightly larger font. So it's going to be branded to us. So I can say, you know, put company name here. And you see that that sits larger and more pronounced than the rest of my navigation. So once I've got that, I'm going to just change this back to logo. I'm going to go ahead and also place in my logo as my Nav Bar brand image. So I'm going to go ahead before the words logo, I'm going to create a new tag for my image, img, src, and I just went ahead and saved the an icon off of Font Awesome into my images folder. So there it is. I grabbed the air freshener tree, save that into my images folder for my test site here, and place in that link there. And I'm going to go ahead and set the alt tag for this to being logo. And then I'm going to just add in a little style tag here to restrict the width to 40%. And save that. And I can see there's my logo placed in here, and I'm going to add in one space here just to space that out a little bit. And there is my logo. And then I can see here is my Nav Bar. So that's how you can bring in your Nav Bar brand into your Nav Bar elements. Very often, especially on small screens, you want to hide the navigation links or replace them with a button that should reveal them when clicked on. So we're going to go ahead and create that collapsed Nav Bar in our demo here. To create the collapsible navigation bar, use a button with a class of Nav Bar Toggle and a data toggle of collapse and a data target. So, and then we're going to wrap the Nav Bar content, such as the links, inside of that div element with the class of collapse Nav Bar collapse, followed by an ID that matches the data target on the button. So this is kind of complicated, but once you get the hang of it, it's not too bad. So I've got my nav class here and my Nav Bar brand. So after my Nav Bar brand here, I'm going to go ahead and create that button that's going to function when we go on to the smaller screen. So I'm going to create a button with a class of Nav Bar Toggler. Set the type to being button, and a data toggle to being collapse. And I'm going to set the data target to being, it's going to have the # collapsible nav bar. So inside of that collapsible nav bar here, I'm going to place in a icon. So I'm going to create the span tag, and I'm going to give it the class of Nav Bar Toggler icon. So that is a default icon. So Nav Bar Toggler icon. So that by default is something built into Bootstrap. And we'll place that in so that will show up as our hamburger menu. Then I'm going to create my div with the class of collapse, nav bar collapse. And I'm going to set the ID. That ID needs to match what we set as a target for that button. So whatever you write there, they must match. So this will, the ID is going to be collapsible nav bar. So the last thing we're going to do for this is we're going to wrap that ending div tag. I'm going to go ahead and cut that. And that's going to wrap all the way around my unordered list. So you can see I've got, here's my nav element, my nav bar brand, and then I have my button here that's going to be that data toggler, and then this div that wraps all the way around my unordered list, which creates the navigation. So I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to go ahead and test it here on my screen. I can see at the larger size that I have my horizontal menu. Once I hit that small breakpoint, then it becomes my hamburger drop down, which functions just like this. I can adjust that breakpoint if I decide that I want this to respond on a medium breakpoint. I can say nav bar expand MD, and then that will adjust on that breakpoint instead of the smaller one. So you can customize where you want that to break and where you want that collapsible nav bar to happen. Nav bars can also hold drop-down menus. So we're going to add the following, we're going to add some code to our nav item. So in our list items here, we're going to create a new list item that has a list that has an option for a drop-down. So say list item or nav item drop down there. And so we've got our href here. We're going to set an ID of being nav bar drop. And I'm going to set this, the data toggle, to drop down. So we'll change this home one to read drop down link, just so we can see it. So it's working still within that list item here. I'm going to create a new div, and this will have the class of drop-down menu. And then I'm going to create a class of drop-down item, drop-down item, href, pound holder place, and this will just be link 1. I'm going to go ahead and copy that, paste it, link 2, and paste again, link 3. I'm going to go ahead and save that, and then I can see that this is my drop-down link, and there's my 3 items here. I want to scoot that in. I can see here's my drop-down link there at the smaller size. You can add a form element to your nav bar by using the form elements and with the class of form inline and some group elements. So we're going to go ahead and place a form element and a button within our nav bar here. So inside of our nav bar, I'm going to go ahead and create a form with a class of form inline. So after the unordered list ends, but still within my my nav bar collapse div, I'm going to go ahead and create my form tag with the class of form inline. Set the action to action page.php. And then within that form, I'm going to create my input field. So I'm going to set the inputs class of form control, MR, which stands for margin right, small 2. So it'll have a small margin right to it. Set the type to being text, and set the placeholder to being search. And then I'm going to go ahead and create my button. So create my button tag, class of BTN success, type is submit, and that button will read search. Go ahead and save that. And then I can see on my collapse size there is my search bar with my button. If I make my screen a little larger, there's my search box here so that I can search for, if you were having somebody search something on your site, you can have that text area and that button right within your navigation elements. To create a fixed navigation bar, you can fix it to the top or the bottom. A fixed navigation bar stays visible in a fixed position, so top or bottom, independent of the page scroll. So the fixed top class makes the navigation bar fixed to the top. So at the top of our page, because currently if we scroll down, it goes away. If we want to fix it to the top, we can go ahead and work within our nav class and just add that class of fixed top. Save that. And that is now affixed to the top. Something to note, when you fix that to the top of the page, you're going to need to add some margin to push all your artwork. So in our instance, we have this photo at the top. We would need 50 to 70 pixels of a margin, depending on the width here of your navigation bar. But I would need to set some CSS to push all of this stuff down, because you see how that kind of hid up underneath it when it's fixed. Conversely, I can fix this to the bottom, so instead of fixed top, it is now fixed bottom. Save that, and now you can see there's our nav bar fixed to the bottom of our page. To create a card in Bootstrap is a pretty simple way to add division of information that is also responsive within your site. So a card in Bootstrap 4 is basically just a bordered box with some padding around its content. It also includes options for headers, footers, content, colors, etc. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a basic card. So I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of my my site here, and I'm just going to start with a nice fresh container here. So I'm going to give it div with a class of container, and then within this container, let me go ahead and comment here. End of container, and then I'm going to create a new div with a class of row, comment that out too, end of row. All right, so within this, I'm going to create, so within my row, I need to create a div for my card. So I'm going to give it a div with a class of card. Comment that out, so end of card. And inside this div, I'm going to simply create another div. So you can see how why we want to comment these as best we can, because there's a lot of divs. So a div with a class of card body. I'm just going to write in the text basic card. We're going to go ahead and save that. And let me go ahead and move my navigation back to being fixed to the top, just because we're working on the bottom of our site. And again, that's going to give us some interesting things with padding. So there's our basic card, because it was getting covered up with our nav bar. So there's our basic card. Not all that exciting. It's just a box with some padding around it. So let's go ahead and stylize that just a little bit more so that it looks like anything interesting. So let's go ahead and add a card header. The card header class adds a heading to the card, and the card footer adds a footer to the card. So we've got our card here, div class of card. So we're going to add some additional classes to our card. So we've got our div with the class of card. We're going to go ahead and create a new div, and that is going to have the class of card header. And that will read header. And then in our card body, it's still, so we can just write our contents or basic card. And then I'm going to create a new div inside of our card div with the class of card footer. And that's going to read footer. So when we save that, we can see here is our header, here's our basic card, and here is our footer. So it gives us some additional spacing around that. So we can add a contextual color to any of these things by adding the class of BG, whatever the class is, BG primary, BG success, warning, danger, etc. So if I wanted to add that in here, I can add the card header and just change this to BG primary, save that, and you can see that that header is now blue. So if you wanted to add a little bit of styling and color that way, the contextual classes also work. You can also create a card that has a title to it. So let's go ahead and see how this looks as opposed to this current card we're working on. Let's create a new card. I'm going to go ahead and create a new div. I'm going to give it a class of card. Comments out in here, end of card, just because we know there's a lot of divs in working with these. I'm going to open that up. I'm going to create my div with a class of card body. And inside of that card body, I'm going to go ahead and give this a title. So I'm going to create an H4 tag here. And that's going to have the class of card title. I'm going to write card title here. And then after that, I'm going to create a paragraph tag. And I'm going to go ahead and give that a class of card text. And write just some example of text. Here's some more, just so I have enough text for us to see that. So there's my text that I'm going to place in. Then I'm going to create a link in here too. So after my paragraph tag, I'm going to go ahead and create my ahref and set that to pound holder, give it the class of card link. So this is going to be my card link. I'm going to go ahead and create another link. Give that a class of card link. And here is another link. Let's go ahead and save that and see how that looks. So you see that my card expanded. It's now a little bit bigger since there's more text here. So here's what the links look like. Here's an example of what our card title looks like and our paragraph text within your basic card. So let's go ahead and create a new card, and in this one we're going to place an image inside of that card. So I'm going to navigate here to the end of this current card. I'm going to place in another card. So I'm going to create a div with the class of card. And I'm going to add some styling to this. So I'm going to add this, set the style to being width of 400 pixels. I'm going to comment this out here so I know this is the end of card. Open that up. And inside here, I'm going to place in an image. So I've already gone ahead and downloaded some images off of Unsplash and placed them in my root folder that I'm working from for this demo. So you can go ahead and download whatever images or work with whatever image you have handy. So I'm going to set the image class is going to be card, img, for image, top. Source that for my images folder. Let me grab card1.jpg. You can see if I hover over it, there's my nice profile picture, nice black and white profile picture of a nice lady. And I'm going to set the alt text to card image. I'm going to place in another div inside of this. So I'm going to create a div with the class of card body. And inside of that div, I'm going to create my h4 tag, give it the class of card title. Oops, card title. And this is going to be Jane Doe. And create my paragraph text, and that's going to have a class of card text. And I'll write in some example text here. And I'm going to go ahead and create a button in this as well. So I'm going to create my A, href, set in a placeholder here, class of btn, btn primary, and write C profile for Jane here. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And you can see that here is Jane Doe, here's our example text, and here's the little button for Jane Doe. There we go. If I put that a larger size, you can see that these cards are all sitting next to each other. It's just getting small, and I haven't actually set any rows for it, but there is my card with an image along the top. So if you would like to turn an image into a card background, you can use the class of card image overlay and then add text on top of an image. So we're going to go ahead and do that on a new card. So let's go ahead and create a new card. I'm going to go to the end of this card. I'm going to go ahead and create a new card. So create a div. Is going to have a class of card. And oops, style. I'm going to set this to being a width of 500 pixels. Go ahead and comment that out. End of card. And then I'm going to work inside of that card. So I'm going to create an image with the class of card IMG for image, top. I'm going to set this source here, and I'm going to find in my images folder this card 2, and I'm going to set the alt text to being card image. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new div with the class of card IMG overlay. Oops, to have that correct. Overlay. And inside there, I'm going to go ahead and place my H4 tag here with a class of card title. And that's going to be, we're going to do Jane Doe again because I believe I got another profile picture of a lady. And create some paragraph text here that's going to have a class of card text. And write some example text here. And go ahead and bring in a button as well. So let's create our button, a href, pound holder, class, btn, primary, C profile. Save that. And now we can see here is our card. This image is much taller, but you can see that here's the text going over this. So there's a difference in styling, so I can run text over this. You can have it working so the image is along the top, information on the bottom, links, headers, footers. So those are some card basics. So our next step in working on our site is we're going to learn how to create a Jumbotron. So a Jumbotron is a class similar to a page header, but it is more dramatic in that it gives a larger text style and creates a gray background that spans across the screen. So to make a new Jumbotron, we're just going to go to the top of our site, and I'm going to go to after the end of our header, but before the beginning of our container here, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new class or a new div and give it the class of Jumbotron. And then I'm going to go ahead and comment this out here, and of Jumbotron. And then inside of our Jumbotron here, I'm going to create some of my content. So I'm going to create an H1 tag and just write page header. And then in just a little bit of a paragraph here, so create a paragraph tag, and so Jumbotron, paragraph here. I'm going to go ahead and save that, and you can see that that created a much larger, so this nice large gray box, so it's a little bit more dramatic than what you would normally have. So a Jumbotron div can start outside the container and go 100% width, which we have here. You can also, so that way this is going 100% of the width, I can also place my Jumbotron inside of a container if I wanted to. So I can simply create a new div and give it a class of container and wrap that around. So let me comment that here. And of, we'll say Jumbotron container. And then I'm going to wrap that all the way around my Jumbotron div here. And save that. And then you can see that that snaps into whatever size container we have. So this is a fixed width container versus if I go ahead and said, okay, let's do a container fluid So our container properties still respond as well to having a Jumbotron. So you can also flip that around and say, okay, maybe I don't want that container wrapping around this. I can also set this to add a class of, I'm going to go ahead and delete that container that's wrapping around everything. Save this so my Jumbotron goes full width, but maybe I want my the text inside of it to stay as opposed to jumping all the way to the left. That can also go into a container as well. So I've got my Jumbotron, and I'm going to set this to Jumbotron fluid in the class here. And then inside of that Jumbotron, I'm going to go ahead and create a div, and I'm going to give that a class of container. And I'm going to wrap that container around my paragraph itself. And then when I save that, you can see that the text in here is now lining up with the rest of my stuff, but the Jumbotron, that background, is now going the full width. So there's a lot of options as far as styling your Jumbotron. You can get into much more advanced options where if you wanted to put in a background picture instead of this gray background, you absolutely can style that up in CSS as well. So there's more options beyond just black text on a gray background. Badges are used to add additional information to any content. So to use some badge classes here, all you need to do is use a badge class together with a contextual class such as badge secondary, badge primary, badge success next to your text to create a badge. And please note that badges will scale to the size of the parent element. So let's see what those look like in practice. So I'm going to scroll down to my H1 tag here for that hello world. I'm going to go ahead and add in a badge. So to do that, I'm going to create a span tag. And I'm going to give that a class of badge secondary. And then I'm going to write the words new. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I can see that this places a little badge inline, so it's a similar style with the H1. So it's sizing to that parent element. So let's look at what that looks like on a paragraph element. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this paragraph here. And I'm going to go ahead and create a badge right next to this lorem ipsum here. So I'm going to create, again, that span tag. And I'm going to give it a class of badge. Do badge primary. And that will be, we'll write new as well. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then you can see how that is styling with what's related to it. So it will style with your H1s, your paragraphs. So whatever you have kind of wrapped around those spans is how the sizing is going to go with your badges. To work with video and responsive embeds, we're going to go ahead and use the video file that's found in Blackboard already pre-made for you. So the first thing we're going to, so make sure you download that and open it up in brackets. So to jump into our code here, we're going to navigate towards the grooming section. So let's find the grooming. There we go. It's right here. And I'm going to go ahead and place in our video file. So I'm going to create the video tag and do a source of, I'm going to find my video folder here, and I'm just going to do the brushing video, and I'm going to set that to autoplay, controls, muted. So it by default will be muted, but it's going to play. And go ahead and save that, and you can see there's my video playing here. So to make the video fit and be responsive, it needs to be inside a div with a class of embed responsive and the proportional class that goes with it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new div, and that's going to have the class of embed responsive and then it'll say, and then the size, so it'll be embed responsive 4x3. And that div is going to wrap all the way around here. There we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and save that. And you see that that now responds to the correct size. So I'm also going to add the class in my video here. So in my video tag, I'm going to add the class of embed responsive item. Save that. There we go. That's looking good. So please note that the proportional class can also be 16:9 depending on the proportion of your video. So that may change depending on the size of your video. This coding can also work for any iframe movies or that you get off of YouTube or Vimeo. To create a carousel within Bootstrap, the carousel is dependent upon the JavaScript that is within the Bootstrap framework. It slides through a number of images and can be controlled with buttons. So we are going to go ahead and create one in our sample file here. So the first thing you need to do is to jump onto Unsplash or your other favorite image site and get some nice, large, wide photos. These work best with photos that are at least 1200 pixels wide. The more narrow the photos are, you may end up seeing where they're cut off on a wider screen. So once you've got your photos selected and saved into your image file, go ahead and jump back into your code after the end of our Jumbotron, but before our container. That's where we're going to go ahead and build our carousel. So the first thing I need to do is create two new divs. The first div has a class of carousel, and the second div is going to have a class of carousel inner. The carousel requires two parts. One is an outer carousel and the other is the inner carousel. So I have a class of carousel inner. Here we go. And once we've got both of those parts, we're going to go ahead and place in our images. So the first thing we need to do is go ahead and create a div with the class of carousel item. And inside that carousel item tag, I'm going to place that image. So I'll find my image here. Locate my images folder. I named all of mine carousel 1, 2, 3, 4. Makes it kind of easy for me to go through and do all of these. So I'll do carousel 1 here. I would create an alt tag as well. And just say, I think these are all like nature shots. And there we go. So that is our div for our carousel items. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that whole thing here, paste it in. This is going to be carousel image 2 because that's how I saved mine. Paste it in again and just update the link with the next image. And there's carousel 4. So if I save this now, you'll notice that nothing really appears on my page. In order to get anything to appear on my first carousel image, or really the one you want to be the first one to lead off, it's probably good bookkeeping to always do the first one. I need to add the active class to that first image. So it says carousel item active. I'm going to go ahead and save that here, and that will bring in my images. Now I've gone ahead and jumped ahead a little bit on the handout and wrote in the CSS that says in my style tag up top, carousel inner IMG width of 100%, height of 100%. Now that's going to get your carousel to style so that it's not full screen. Let me go ahead and comment that out for you so you can see what it looks like without. So without that styling, it's going to take a second to load here because these images are huge. So if this is what that was looking like for you when you first loaded it up, go ahead and jump into your style tag up at the top of your page, write dot carousel inner IMG width 100%, height 100%, just to make the width and the height responsive to your site. So then we'll scroll back down in here to our, let's find our carousel here, and we need to add in, to get the images to change, we need to set a data ride to this because right now nothing is moving. So I'm going to find my outer carousel and I'm going to add a data ride. We'll set the data ride to carousel. We'll go ahead and save that. And then we're also going to set the class on this to get the images to slide. So right now they're just changing, it's just kind of blinking. To get them to slide, we're going to set the class to carousel slide and save that. And then you should see the images starting to slide. To add captions on top of your images, you're going to create a new div with the class of carousel captions. So let's go ahead and do that on this first image here. So within this div of carousel item, inside here, I'm going to open that div up and I'm going to go ahead and create a new div and I'm going to give it the class of carousel caption. Then inside that div, I'm going to go ahead and create an H3 tag and I'll place my headline here. And I'll create a paragraph tag and I'm going to go ahead and write caption text here. I'll save that and then that will show up. There's my headline, there's my caption, oops, spelled wrong, caption text there. To add navigation to your site, so to add a forward and back indicators to your carousel, we're going to go ahead and create those variables within our code. So after the ending div class for their carousel inner, but still inside the outer carousel, I'm going to go ahead and create that code. So to create the controls, I'm going to need to create a link. So I'm going to create the A. Class is carousel control prev. So this will be the left, the previous one. Oops. We're going to set the href to being featured. Set the role of button and the data slide to previous. Then we're going to go ahead and create the icon. So I'm going to create the span tag here and I'm going to give it the class of carousel control prev icon. So that will create our previous icon. Now something I neglected to do in that first step is I need to go ahead and set an ID for this carousel so that way I can trigger these buttons to work. So to set the ID for that carousel, I just need to go up to my outer carousel here, and I need to set the ID, and we're going to call it featured. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. So whatever you set for the ID, it needs to be targeted down here for those icons. So now once I have that set, I can see that I have this featured button, or this previous button, working. So let's go ahead and do the next button. So I'm going to go ahead and just highlight that whole carousel control here, copy it, paste it in, and then I just need to change these to read next. So where you have carousel control prev, it needs to read next. The data slide needs to be next. And then the icon also needs to be next. Save that. Now as loads, I can see that I have my next buttons and my previous buttons. And that's all working great. So the last thing we need to do on this is to put in our indicators, which shows how many images we have. So I'm going to navigate towards the top of my carousel here. So still within my carousel, but before we get into the images themselves. So inside my carousel inner here, I'm going to create an ordered list. So I'm going to create my ordered list tags, and that needs to have the class of carousel indicator. Carousel indicators here. And then within my ordered list here, I'm going to create a list item, and that's going to have the data target of featured, so that pound featured, so it's targeting that ID that we've already set. And I'm going to set the data slide to 0. Now, it's important to note that this is calling the built-in JavaScript within Bootstrap. JavaScript is a 0 base language, so they don't start counting at 1, they start counting at 0. So you must start with 0 to get that first image to work. So now that I've got that, I'm gonna, and I know I have 4 images in here, I'm gonna copy that entire list item here. I'm gonna paste it in so that I have 4 list items here because I have 4 images. And I'm going to set the data slides to being 0, 1, 2, and 3. And then I'm going to save that. And you see that here that brings in my indicators, which shows me which they light up. And you can see what picture you're on based on where they're lighting up at. So, where you have the 0 also needs to be consistent with the with whatever item is set to active. So it's important to have that be consistent, otherwise things are going to load a little bit funky. So right now we have our carousel going the full width of the page. If you wanted your carousel to be inside a container and respond to a container, you can do that very easily. You would just create a container and wrap the entire thing inside of a container if you wanted padding. I happen to think this one looks particularly nice in a outside of a container, so that way it's going full screen. You may notice that these pictures are different sizes, so that's causing our text below it to jump. A note about that, there's a lot of scripts out in the world that you can grab that will contain the images itself, or so that way they're all set to being a consistent size. The easiest way around that is to simply size them all the same in Photoshop. That way you have a consistent slide and you're not writing any custom JavaScript to get those to not bounce around. It's just simply size them all the same in Photoshop. That way they all look consistent and they're all behaving consistently. This was on purpose that these are not all the same, so you can see what the behaviors are without the images being the same. It's also to note that our photos, if I start stretching this really, photos might actually be decently sized. My photos are pretty decent size. If your photos get too small, you may end up with a little bit of blank on the size. Your minimum width of a carousel image should be 1200 pixels. It's better if they're closer to 3000. That way, no matter how big these size, they look really, really nice. It's not going to run out of the end and then you get kind of a blank image on the size. So it's important to pre-size your carousel images in Photoshop before bringing into the site. It's just good, good practice on making your site. So there you go. That is the end of part 3 on your introduction to Bootstrap. So the next step is we're going to create an entire site start to finish next week. So thanks for watching and have a great night.